The neon sign buzzed, casting a pink glow over the Formica counter. Harper buried her face in her hands. The custody papers in her apron weighed like lead. "I need a husband by tomorrow," she sobbed to the empty diner, the words tearing from her throat. She didn't hear the heavy leather boots stop behind her. She didn't smell the expensive cologne masking gunpowder. She had absolutely no idea the city's most dangerous man had just found his perfect alibi. Harper's shift at Lou's Diner should have ended 3 hours ago. The analog clock above the revolving pie case hummed, its fluorescent backlight flickering sporadically over the numeral 3. It was 3 in the morning. Outside, the rain came down in relentless, punishing sheets, turning the cracked city pavements into slick, oily mirrors reflecting the amber streetlights. Inside, the air hung heavy. It smelled of stale French fries, burnt filter coffee, and the sharp, chemical tang of industrial floor bleach. Harper scrubbed the stained Formica counter until her knuckles throbbed with a dull, rhythmic ache. The yellow sponge in her hand was disintegrating, leaving tiny yellow crumbs in the grease. She didn't care. The repetitive, mindless motion was the only thing keeping her tethered to reality. If she stopped moving, she would have to think. And if she thought about tomorrow, she was going to scream until her lungs gave out. In the right pocket of her grease-stained apron, folded into sharp, angry squares, lay the legal notice. Family Court, 9 in the morning. Her Uncle Richard was not a good man. He smelled perpetually of cheap cigars, old beer, and unearned entitlement. He had never once cared about her 8-year-old sister, Lily. When their mother died 6 months ago, Richard didn't even shed a tear at the funeral. He had spent the wake asking the funeral director about the resale value of the casket brass. But Richard cared deeply about the life insurance policy. The money was locked in a trust, intended strictly for Lily's care, and whoever held legal custody controlled the payout. Harper's public defender had been brutally honest on the phone that afternoon, his voice crackling through a bad cell connection. "He has a 4-bedroom house in the suburbs, Harper. He has a wife of 20 years. You're a 24-year-old waitress working graveyard shifts, living in a damp studio apartment above a bowling alley. The judge is going to look at stability. The court doesn't care that you love her. They care about metrics. Unless you can walk into that courtroom tomorrow with a 2-income household, a stable partner, and a white picket fence, Richard gets guardianship, and Lily goes with him. A family, stability, a husband." She threw the ruined sponge into the aluminum sink. It hit the metal with a wet, depressing slap. Harper gripped the edge of the counter, leaning her entire body weight over the basin. Her chest tightened, the air refusing to fill her lungs. A jagged, ugly breath scraped its way up her throat. She closed her eyes, but the darkness offered no relief. All she saw was Lily sitting on the floor of their cramped apartment, coloring with broken crayons, waiting patiently for Harper to come home with leftover pancakes. Lily, who still had nightmares about the hospital. Lily, who would be handed over to a man who saw her as nothing more than a walking paycheck. The tears came fast. They were hot, bitter, and entirely useless. Harper's legs gave out. She slid down the cheap wooden cabinets, her back scraping against the handles, until she hit the scuffed linoleum floor. She pulled her knees tightly to her chest, wrapping her arms around her shins. "I need a husband by tomorrow," she whispered. Her voice broke, a pathetic wet sound, swallowed by the hum of the refrigerators. She buried her face in her hands, her narrow shoulders shaking violently as the reality of her failure crushed the breath out of her. Just one day. God, I just need a husband. She thought she was entirely alone. The brass bell above the front door hadn't rung in over an hour. Old man Lou was asleep in the back office, snoring over a ledger. She was wrong. In the furthest corner booth, completely obscured by the shadows of a busted overhead light, sat Vincent Romano. He hadn't touched his coffee. The thick ceramic mug was ice cold. He sat perfectly still in the vinyl booth, a deeply ingrained habit born of a lifetime spent watching rooms for sudden movements and hidden threats. He wore a charcoal wool suit that cost more than Harper made in 3 consecutive years. The tailoring was immaculate, designed to hide the holster at his left hip. His tie was loosened, the top button of his crisp white shirt undone, revealing a faint, jagged scar at the base of his throat. Vincent wasn't a man who frequented 24-hour diners. He was a man who owned half the commercial real estate in the financial district and controlled the shipping yards on the east side with an iron, blood-soaked fist. He was also a man currently staring down the barrel of a massive federal indictment. His lawyer's panicked words from earlier that evening echoed in his head, forming a cynical, twisted mirror to the waitress's own crisis. The district attorney is painting you as a reckless, violent bachelor, Vince. A loose cannon with no ties to the community. The jury is going to eat it up. You want to soften your image before the trial begins? You need to look human, grounded. You need roots. You need a wife. A quiet, unassuming civilian wife would throw their entire character assassination out the window. It proves you're building a life, not a syndicate. Vincent had spent the last 4 hours sitting in the dark of this miserable diner, calculating the logistics of acquiring a spouse with the same cold detachment he used to negotiate hostile takeovers. It needed to be someone desperate enough to take a massive payout, but completely unconnected to his dark world. Someone clean, someone invisible. Then the waitress had broken down. He watched her cry on the dirty linoleum. From the shadows, his dark eyes cataloged every detail. He noted the fraying hem of her cheap jeans, the dark bruised circles of exhaustion under her eyes, and the sheer, unadulterated panic radiating from her small frame. "I need a husband by tomorrow," she had sobbed. Vincent tilted his head, a muscle feathering along his strong jawline. It was almost too perfect. A waitress, a desperate working-class girl with no ties to the rival syndicates, no ambitious mafia father trying to leverage a marriage for territory. Just a woman drowning in the shallow end of her own life, begging the empty room for a lifeline. He stood up. The soles of his custom leather shoes made a soft, deliberate sound on the checkered tile. He didn't try to mask his approach. He walked down the narrow aisle between the red vinyl booths, stepping into the flickering fluorescent light. The faint, masculine scent of bergamot, expensive tobacco, and rain preceded him. Harper didn't hear him until he was standing directly on the other side of the counter, looking down at her trembling form. "I can be available at 8 in the morning." The voice was a low, gravelly baritone that vibrated straight through the cheap laminate of the counter. It didn't belong in Lou's diner. It carried the weight of quiet authority, the kind of voice accustomed to issuing orders that were followed immediately, without question. Harper gasped, a strangled sound of pure shock. Her head snapped up. She scrambled backward on the linoleum, her sneakers squeaking against the wet floor. Her heart slammed against her ribs like a trapped bird. She scrambled to her feet, instinctively grabbing a heavy ceramic coffee mug from the drying rack to use as a weapon. Vincent didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. He merely stood perfectly still, his hands resting loosely at his sides. His dark, fathomless eyes locked onto hers, holding her gaze with terrifying intensity. "Who are you?" Harper demanded, her voice shaking despite her desperate attempt to sound fierce. She gripped the mug tighter, her knuckles turning white. "The diner is closed. Lou locked the door at 2. How did you get in here?" "The side door was wedged open with a cinder block to let the smoke out," Vincent replied smoothly, his tone flat and utterly unbothered by her makeshift weapon. "I've been sitting in the corner booth for 4 hours. You refilled my water glass twice." Harper blinked, the tears blurring her vision. She wiped her eyes furiously with the back of her hand, smearing old grease across her cheek. She looked closely at him for the first time. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and radiated an aura of quiet, lethal danger. The expensive cut of his suit, the gold watch glinting on his thick wrist, the hard, unforgiving lines of his face. None of it belonged on this side of town. Slowly, Vincent reached into the breast pocket of his suit jacket. Harper tensed, raising the mug higher, but he only withdrew a pristine, monogrammed white handkerchief. He placed it gently on the counter between them. "Dry your face," he instructed. It wasn't a request. Harper stared at the cloth, then back at his face. "I don't want your handkerchief. I want you to leave before I scream for my boss. Your boss has sleep apnea and is dead to the world. And you don't want me to leave," Vincent said, his voice dropping a fraction of an inch. "Because you need a husband by tomorrow morning. And as I just told you, my schedule is clear at 8. Harper's stomach plummeted. The blood rushed from her face, leaving her cold and clammy. He had heard everything. Her pathetic, humiliating breakdown. The desperation. "You're insane," she whispered, taking another step back. "You're some sick creep who listens to people cry. I'm calling the police." "Call them," Vincent offered, gesturing casually to the greasy landline mounted on the wall behind her. "But the police can't give you a marriage license, and they certainly can't sit beside you in family court at 9 o'clock and convince a judge that you have the financial stability to raise a child." Harper froze. Her hand hovered halfway to the telephone receiver. The air in the diner suddenly felt incredibly thin. "How do you know about family court?" "I don't," Vincent said, his expression completely unreadable. "It was an educated guess based on the legal notice sticking out of your apron. The fact that you're weeping about needing a husband overnight, and the child's drawing of a dog taped to the cash register with the name Lily scrawled on it. You're fighting for a kid, and you're losing." Harper swallowed hard. The metallic taste of fear coated the back of her throat. This man was observing her life with the clinical precision of a surgeon dissecting a corpse. She felt entirely exposed. "Listen to me," Harper said, trying to inject some steel into her spine. "I don't know what kind of sick joke this is, but I don't have time for it. I'm losing my sister tomorrow to a man who will probably drain her trust fund and throw her in a boarding school. I don't have money. I don't have anything you could possibly want, so just go away." Vincent finally moved. He leaned his forearms against the counter, closing the distance between them. The scent of rain and expensive cologne enveloped her. Up close, his eyes were a startling, cold shade of gray. "I don't want your money," Vincent said quietly. "I have more money than God. What I have is a severe public relations problem. My lawyers have informed me that I appear detached, aggressive, and entirely untethered to polite society. I need to present an image of domestic stability. I need a wife who is quiet, respectable, and entirely unremarkable. Someone who can stand next to me in a courtroom and look at me like I hung the moon. Harper's mind raced, struggling to process the sheer absurdity of the conversation. You need a character witness. I need a prop, Vincent corrected bluntly, valuing honesty over tact. You are bleeding out, and I am offering you a tourniquet, a marriage on paper. You get a husband with a legal, documented income that will make your judge weep with joy. I provide a house, a background, and the absolute guarantee that you keep your sister. In exchange, you wear my ring, you smile for the cameras, and you ask absolutely no questions about what I do for a living. Harper stared at him. It was a deal with the devil. He was practically radiating darkness. But in her mind's eye, she saw her Uncle Richard's smug, oily face. She saw Lily's terrified tears. How long? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. A year, Vincent replied without missing a beat. Once my trial is over, we quietly annul it. You walk away with a generous severance package. Your sister's future is secured. Harper looked at the cold, unyielding man standing across from her. He was dangerous. She knew it in her bones. But tomorrow morning, at 9 o'clock, she was going to lose the only family she had left. She slowly lowered the coffee mug, setting it down on the counter with a soft clink. She picked up the monogrammed handkerchief. 8 a.m., Harper said, her voice dropping to a harsh, resolved whisper. Don't be late. Vincent's mouth twitched into the ghost of a smirk. I never am. A car will be waiting outside your apartment at 7. Wear something nice. The floorboards of Harper's apartment vibrated with a low, constant rumble. Downstairs, the morning league at the bowling alley was already warming up. The heavy thud of urethane balls hitting polished wood serving as her daily alarm clock. It was 6 in the morning. She hadn't slept. She stood in front of the cracked bathroom mirror, gripping the edges of the pedestal sink. Her reflection offered no comfort. Her skin was pale, drawn tight over her cheekbones, and the dark smudges under her eyes looked like bruises. She stripped off the diner uniform, letting it drop to the peeling linoleum. The stale scent of fried oil lingered on her skin, even after a brutally cold 10-minute shower. In the main room, which served as a kitchen, living area, and bedroom, Lily was still asleep on the pull-out sofa. She was a tiny lump beneath a faded, pill-covered fleece blanket. One thin arm dangled over the edge, her fingers lightly brushing the worn carpet. Harper walked over quietly and pulled the blanket back up, tucking it under her sister's chin. Lily mumbled in her sleep, burying her face into the flat pillow. Harper swallowed the hard knot forming in her throat. She moved to her closet, a metal rolling rack in the corner, and pushed aside the t-shirts and jeans. She had exactly one dress that wasn't meant for a shift at Lou's. It was a simple navy blue sheath she had bought from a thrift store for their mother's funeral. It fit decently, though it felt entirely wrong for a wedding. But this wasn't a wedding. It was a transaction. At exactly 6:50, Harper heard the purr of a heavy engine cut through the noise of the morning traffic. She pulled back the cheap plastic blinds. Parked at the curb, taking up 2 spaces and looking violently out of place next to the rusted dumpsters, was a massive obsidian black SUV with tinted windows. A man in a sharp black suit stepped out of the driver's side. He didn't look like a chauffeur. His shoulders were too broad, his neck too thick, and his eyes scanned the street with a predatory, calculating sweep before settling on her apartment window. Panic, sharp and metallic, spiked in Harper's chest. The reality of what she had agreed to do in the desperate, exhausting hours of the night crashed into her. She was tying herself to a man who lived in the shadows. But then she looked at Lily's shoes, a pair of scuffed pink sneakers sitting by the door, the soles worn entirely flat. She grabbed her purse, shaking her younger sister awake. "Come on, Bug," Harper whispered, smoothing Lily's messy brown hair. "We have to go to court today, remember?" Lily rubbed her eyes, nodding sleepily. Mrs. Gable, the elderly woman from down the hall, had agreed to sit with Lily in the courthouse lobby during the hearing. Harper ushered them both down the narrow, dimly lit stairwell. The driver opened the rear door of the SUV as they approached. He didn't smile, but his movements were precise and respectful. Harper helped Lily and Mrs. Gable into the back, sliding in beside them. The doors shut with a heavy, vacuum-sealed thud, instantly drowning out the sounds of the city. The leather seats felt like butter. The air smelled of ozone and expensive detailing spray. They drove in complete silence to City Hall. Vincent was waiting on the sweeping marble steps. In the harsh light of morning, he looked even more imposing. He wore a navy suit today, tailored to aggressive perfection, a silver tie resting against a crisp white shirt. He stood with his hands in his pockets, flanked by two men who mirrored the driver's intense, vigilant posture. Harper left Lily with Mrs. Gable in the vehicle, instructing the driver to keep the air conditioning running, and walked up the steps alone. Her cheap heels clicked faintly against the stone, a stark contrast to the heavy, silent power radiating from Vincent's camp. "You're on time," Vincent said, his gray eyes sweeping over her navy dress. He offered no compliments. He merely assessed her, a general inspecting a new asset. "I don't have the luxury of being late," Harper replied, her voice remarkably steady despite the frantic drumming of her heart. "Good." Vincent turned, gesturing for her to follow him into the cavernous building. "My lawyer has expedited the paperwork. A judge on the second floor owes me a favor. We waive the waiting period. We sign the papers. We read the standard vows. It will take less than 10 minutes. He wasn't exaggerating. The judge's chambers smelled of old paper and lemon polish. The man behind the heavy oak desk looked nervous, his eyes darting to Vincent constantly, sweating lightly through his robes. He didn't ask why they were rushing. He didn't ask for their story. He simply began reading the legal requirements in a rapid, monotonous drone. "Do you, Vincent Romano, take this woman?" Vincent's voice was utterly flat, devoid of any emotion. "I do." "Do you, Harper?" Harper hesitated for a fraction of a second. She looked at Vincent. His expression was a wall of cold granite. He wasn't a man. He was a shield. She looked at the judge. "I do." Vincent reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He snapped it open. The ring inside caught the dusty light of the office, refracting it in sharp, brilliant flashes. It was a platinum band holding a diamond so large it looked fake. He took her left hand. His grip was firm, his skin warm and slightly calloused. He slid the heavy ring onto her fourth finger. It fit perfectly. "Sign here," the judge stammered, sliding a thick document across the desk. Harper gripped the heavy silver pen. Her hand shook as she wrote her name, sealing the bargain. She was no longer just a waitress drowning in debt. She was the property of a man she didn't know, a pawn in a game she didn't understand. Vincent signed his name with rapid, slashing strokes. He picked up the marriage certificate, folded it neatly, and slipped it into his breast pocket. "Let's go," he said, turning toward the door without looking back. "We have a custody hearing to win." The family court building was 3 blocks away, but it felt like a different universe. The air in the waiting area was thick with despair, smelling of damp wool, nervous sweat, and cheap coffee. Fluorescent lights buzzed angrily overhead, casting a sickly yellow pallor over the rows of uncomfortable plastic chairs. Uncle Richard was already there, leaning against the pale green wall outside courtroom 4B. He wore a rumpled tan suit that pulled too tight across his middle. He was chewing loudly on a toothpick, a smug, relaxed smirk plastered across his flushed face. When he saw Harper walking down the corridor, his smirk widened into a grin of pure, malicious triumph. Then he noticed the man walking beside her. Vincent moved through the crowded hallway like a shark gliding through a tank of minnows. People subconsciously stepped out of his way, their eyes dropping to the floor. The 2 suited men flanking him created an invisible barrier, a perimeter of quiet intimidation. Richard's grin faltered. He spat the toothpick into a nearby trash can, his small eyes narrowing in confusion as the entourage stopped directly in front of him. "Nice of you to show up, Harper," Richard sneered, recovering his bravado, though his voice lacked its usual volume. He pointed a stubby finger at Vincent. "Who are these guys? Your lawyers? Good luck paying them when you're slinging hash for minimum wage." Harper felt a surge of cold satisfaction. She didn't say a word. She simply held up her left hand. The massive diamond caught the ugly fluorescent light, throwing sparks across the dreary hallway. Richard's face drained of color. His jaw worked silently for a moment before he let out a harsh, disbelieving laugh. "You think a fake ring is going to fool Judge Reynolds? You're pathetic." Before Harper could respond, the heavy wooden doors of the courtroom swung open. A bored-looking bailiff called their case number. The courtroom was small and claustrophobic. Judge Reynolds, a stern-faced woman with iron-gray hair, sat behind the elevated bench, peering over her reading glasses at the files spread before her. Richard's lawyer, a sleazy man with a comb-over, started immediately. He paced the floor, his voice dripping with condescension. He painted a grim picture. He detailed Harper's income down to the penny. He brought out photographs of the peeling paint outside her building and the neon sign of the bowling alley. "Your Honor," the lawyer concluded, resting his hands on Richard's table, "my client offers a stable, 4-bedroom home. He offers a 2-income household. The sister, while well-meaning, is 24 years old, unmarried, living in squalor, and works overnight shifts. She cannot provide the environment a traumatized 8-year-old girl requires." Judge Reynolds sighed, looking over her glasses at Harper. Pity softened her harsh features. "Miss, I understand you love your sister, but the court must look at the math, the environment." Vincent didn't wait for Harper's lawyer to speak. He stood up. The entire courtroom seemed to shrink around him. He didn't pace. He didn't raise his voice. He simply stood at the defense table, buttoning his suit jacket with a terrifying calm. "Your Honor," Vincent said, his deep baritone echoing off the wood-paneled walls. "With respect to opposing counsel, his information is entirely outdated." He gestured slightly with his left hand. One of the suited men, who had been sitting quietly in the gallery, stepped forward, handing a thick manila folder to the bailiff, who passed it up to the judge. "My name is Vincent Romano," he continued, the syllables rolling smoothly off his tongue. "And as of 8:15 this morning, I am Harper's husband and Lily's brother-in-law." Uncle Richard shot out of his chair. "Objection! This is a sham. She was a single waitress yesterday." "Sit down," Judge Reynolds snapped, her eyes glued to the documents inside the folder. The silence in the room stretched, thick and suffocating, as she turned page after page. Harper watched the judge's face. She saw the initial skepticism warp into surprise, and then morph into a carefully concealed shock. Vincent hadn't just provided a bank statement. He had provided the financial equivalent of a nuclear bomb. Tax returns, deeds to estates in the hills, ironclad trust funds set up that very morning in Lily's name, dwarfing the insurance policy Richard was after. "Mr. Romano," the judge said slowly, looking up from the paperwork, "these are substantial assets." "My wife," Vincent said, the word sounding foreign and heavy on his lips, "will no longer be working overnight shifts. She will be managing our household in the Heights, a 6-bedroom estate with 24-hour security, a private tutor for Lily, and extensive grounds. I believe that satisfies the court's requirement for a stable environment." He looked directly at Richard. The uncle shrank back into his chair, the fight completely bleeding out of him. He knew the name Romano. Everyone in this city did. He realized, with a sickening jolt, exactly who he was trying to cross. Judge Reynolds closed the folder. She looked at Richard, then back to the imposing man standing beside the exhausted young woman. The math had completely changed. "Custody is awarded to the sister, effective immediately," the judge declared, striking her gavel with a sharp crack that echoed like a gunshot. Case dismissed. Harper's knees buckled. She gripped the edge of the heavy wooden table to keep from collapsing. A ragged sob tore its way out of her throat. She had won. Lily was safe. A large, warm hand wrapped around her elbow, steadying her. She looked up into Vincent's cold, unreadable gray eyes. "Breathe," he ordered softly. They walked out of the courtroom together. Down the hall, Mrs. Gable was holding Lily's hand. The little girl looked up, her eyes wide with apprehension. Vincent stopped a few feet away, observing the child with the same clinical detachment he used on balance sheets. Lily stared back, unnerved by his sheer size. Harper stepped forward, pulling her sister into a fierce, desperate hug. She buried her face in Lily's hair, smelling cheap shampoo and little girl sweat. She had saved her, but as Harper looked over Lily's shoulder, catching Vincent's dark, impassive stare, the crushing weight of the diamond on her left hand dragged her back to reality. She hadn't just saved her sister, she had sold her soul to the devil to do it. And the devil was now her husband. The drive from the courthouse to the Heights took 45 minutes. For Harper, it felt like crossing a dimensional rift. The crumbling brick and graffiti-stained concrete of her neighborhood gradually bled into wide, tree-lined avenues and manicured lawns. The heavy SUV turned off the main road, its tires crunching onto a long, sweeping driveway paved with crushed white gravel. Wrought iron gates, standing 12 feet high and topped with brutal steel spikes, parted silently as they approached. Lily had her face pressed against the tinted glass, leaving small, round smudge marks. Her breath hitched. "Are we going to a hotel, Harpy?" she whispered, her voice barely carrying over the hum of the air conditioning. "No, Bug," Harper lied, the word sticking in her dry throat. "This is a house. It was a fortress." The estate was built from pale, rough-hewn stone, sitting aggressively on a hill that overlooked the sprawling city skyline below. There were no welcoming flower beds. The landscaping was sharply geometric, intimidating, and impeccably maintained. Security cameras were tucked seamlessly into the eaves, their tiny red lenses swiveling to track the vehicle's approach. The SUV glided to a stop beneath a massive stone portico. The driver, a man Vincent had curtly introduced earlier as Mateo, was out of the car before the engine fully cut, opening Harper's door. Vincent stepped out of the opposite side. He didn't wait for them. He walked up the wide stone steps and pushed open the heavy oak front doors. Harper grabbed Lily's hand, clutching it tighter than necessary, and followed. The foyer was cavernous. The floor was laid with polished black marble that reflected the harsh, bright daylight spilling from the massive arched windows. It felt like a museum, devoid of any warmth or personal history. There were no family photographs, no scattered shoes, just silence, heavy and absolute. An older woman stood at the base of the sweeping double staircase. She wore a simple charcoal dress, her graying hair pulled into a severe, unyielding bun. Her posture was ramrod straight. "Beatrice," Vincent said, tossing his keys onto a silver tray resting on a mahogany console table. "This is Harper and her sister Lily. They live here now." Beatrice didn't blink. She offered a curt, professional nod. "Of course, Mr. Romano. I have prepared the East Wing suites as you instructed. Shall I show the young lady to her room?" Harper instinctively pulled Lily a fraction of an inch closer to her leg. The terrifying reality of her situation was settling into her bones. She was trapped in a house owned by a man who bought human lives like commodities. Vincent noticed the protective gesture. His dark eyes flicked down to Harper's white-knuckled grip on the child's hand. "Take Lily upstairs, Beatrice. Show her the television," Vincent ordered smoothly, though the undercurrent of command was unmistakable. He looked at Harper. "My study, now." Harper knelt on the cold marble, looking Lily in the eye. "Go with Beatrice, okay? I'll be right up. I promise." Lily hesitated, her small shoulders tense, before nodding and taking the housekeeper's offered hand. Harper watched them ascend the grand staircase until they disappeared down a long, shadowed corridor. Only then did she turn and follow Vincent. His study smelled of old paper, expensive leather, and the lingering sharp scent of scotch. The walls were lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, though Harper suspected he rarely read them. A massive mahogany desk dominated the center of the room. Vincent didn't sit. He stood by the window, his broad back to her, looking out over the manicured grounds. "There are rules," he said, his voice dropping the polite veneer he had worn in the courtroom. "You will not go to that diner ever again. You will not associate with your former landlord. You will completely sever ties with your previous life." Harper bristled, a spark of defensive anger fighting through her exhaustion. "I need my last paycheck, and we left all our clothes at the apartment." "Your clothes are garbage," Vincent replied bluntly, turning to face her. The cruel honesty in his tone hit her like a physical blow. "And you don't need a paycheck. You are the wife of Vincent Romano. You do not sling coffee to truckers." He opened the top drawer of his desk, withdrew a sleek black credit card, and slid it across the polished wood. "Buy a wardrobe that fits your new surname," he instructed. "Buy the kid whatever she wants. Toys, clothes, books. I don't care about the cost. But tomorrow night, the mayor is hosting a charity gala for the pediatric hospital. We are attending. You will wear something appropriate, you will stand by my side, and you will look like a woman who married for love." Harper stared at the black plastic on the desk. It felt like a trap. "I don't know how to do this," she said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. She crossed her arms tightly over her chest, suddenly feeling incredibly exposed in her cheap thrift store dress. "I don't know your world. I don't know how to pretend I belong here." Vincent walked around the desk. He stopped inches from her. Up close, the sheer physical size of him was overwhelming. He reached out, his warm, calloused fingers lightly brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. The touch was terrifyingly gentle. "You don't need to know my world, Harper," he said softly, his gray eyes locking onto hers. "You just need to know how to smile when the cameras flash. Leave the rest to me." 3 days later, the air inside the armored limousine was suffocatingly thick. Harper sat rigidly against the plush leather seat, staring out the tinted window at the blurring city lights. She felt like an imposter wearing someone else's skin. The emerald green silk gown draped over her body cost more than her Uncle Richard's entire house. The fabric clung perfectly to her waist before flowing down to her heels, the deep plunge of the neckline secured by a heavy, antique diamond pendant that Vincent had casually handed her an hour before they left. "Stop fidgeting," Vincent murmured, his voice a low, vibrating rumble over the hum of the tires. Harper dropped her hands into her lap, her manicured nails digging into her palms. "I can't breathe in this thing, and the necklace is too heavy." "The necklace belonged to my mother," Vincent said, not looking at her. He was scrolling through emails on an encrypted phone, his face illuminated by the harsh white glow of the screen. "It's a recognized piece. The press will photograph it. It establishes legacy. It proves you aren't just a fleeting distraction." Harper swallowed the bitter taste in her mouth. Every action, every piece of jewelry, every public touch, it was all a meticulously calculated strategy to save him from a federal prison cell. She was a chess piece. The limousine slowed to a crawl, merging into a line of expensive vehicles outside the grand entrance of the Plaza Hotel. Flashbulbs erupted in a blinding staccato rhythm against the tinted glass. The sheer volume of the press corps waiting behind the velvet ropes was terrifying. "Listen to me," Vincent said, finally putting his phone away. He turned his body toward her, dominating the small space. His gray eyes were sharp, scanning her face for weakness. "When the door opens, you take my arm. You do not look down. You do not answer any questions. You smile, and you walk straight into the lobby. Understood?" Harper gave a jerky nod. Her throat was too dry to speak. Mateo opened the door. The roar of the crowd washed over them like a physical wave. Shouting reporters, the frantic clicking of camera shutters, the blinding glare of white lights. Vincent stepped out first, effortlessly commanding the space. He turned, offering his hand. Harper took it. His grip was unyielding, anchoring her to the pavement. As she stepped into the flashing lights, he pulled her close, his hand sliding smoothly around her waist. The heavy silk of her dress offered no barrier to the heat of his palm against her lower back. It was a possessive, territorial touch. "Smile, Harper," he whispered against her ear, his breath brushing her skin. It looked like an intimate secret to the cameras. It felt like a threat. She forced the corners of her mouth up. They walked the gauntlet. The ballroom was a sea of tailored tuxedos and glittering gowns. A string quartet played softly over the low, rhythmic hum of wealthy conversation. But the moment Vincent Romano walked through the double doors, the atmosphere in the room shifted. It was subtle, a slight hesitation in laughter, eyes darting sideways, bodies instinctively shifting to clear a path. He was a predator in a room full of well-dressed prey, and she was tethered to his side. For the first hour, Vincent played the part of the rehabilitated businessman flawlessly. He introduced Harper to senators, shipping magnates, and the mayor himself. He kept his hand firmly on the small of her back, occasionally leaning in to murmur something innocuous that made it seem like they shared a private joke. Then Carmine stepped into their orbit. Carmine was an older man with a pockmarked face and a smile that never quite reached his dead, reptilian eyes. He ran the narcotics trade on the South Side, a direct rival to Vincent's territory. "Vince," Carmine slurred slightly, holding a half-empty glass of bourbon. He didn't offer his hand. His gaze slid lazily from Vincent to Harper, stripping her down with a slow, deliberate sweep. "I heard you tied the knot. Didn't believe it. You never struck me as the domestic type." "People change, Carmine," Vincent said. His voice was pleasant, but the temperature around them seemed to plummet. His hand tightened imperceptibly on Harper's waist. Carmine took a step closer, invading their space. The smell of stale alcohol and expensive cigars wafted off him. He leaned toward Harper. "Where did he find you, sweetheart? You don't look like you belong in this neighborhood. A bit fragile, ain't she, Vince? Be a shame if the pressure of your business broke her." It was a blatant, thinly veiled threat. The air in the ballroom seemed to stop moving. Harper froze, her heart hammering violently against her ribs. She didn't know who this man was, but the malice rolling off him was suffocating. Vincent didn't yell. He didn't break his calm facade. He simply let go of Harper's waist and took one single, calculated step forward, placing himself entirely between her and Carmine. "Carmine," Vincent said softly, his voice dropping to a deadly, quiet register that only the three of them could hear. "If you look at my wife again, I will have Matteo cut your eyes out in the coat room. If you speak to her again, I will burn your South Side operation to the ground while you watch. Are we clear?" Carmine's smug smile vanished. The color drained from his pockmarked face. He stared into Vincent's eyes, searching for a bluff, and found nothing but cold, absolute certainty. "Crystal," Carmine muttered, backing away quickly, his bravado shattered. Vincent turned back to Harper. His face was entirely relaxed, the terrifying monster she had just witnessed retreating beneath the surface of the tailored suit. He reached out, gently adjusting the diamond pendant resting on her collarbone. "Are you all right, darling?" he asked, his voice loud enough for a passing waiter to hear. Harper stared at the man she had married. He was a monster. He was ruthless, violent, and utterly terrifying. But as his fingers brushed her skin, a terrifying realization settled in her chest. He was her monster, and for the first time in her life, she felt completely, undeniably safe. The ride back to the estate was suffocatingly quiet. The privacy partition between the driver and the rear cabin was firmly raised, sealing Harper and Vincent in a soundproof leather vault. The adrenaline that had kept Harper's spine straight all evening was rapidly draining, leaving behind a bone-deep ache. She reached behind her neck, her fingers clumsy and shaking, struggling with the intricate clasp of the diamond pendant. It felt like a chain, Vincent watched her from the opposite seat. He had discarded his suit jacket and loosened his tie, the harsh streetlights flashing through the tinted windows and illuminating the sharp angles of his face. He leaned forward, brushing her trembling hands away. "Let me," he said. His voice was a low rumble in the quiet car. Harper dropped her hands to her lap, holding her breath. Vincent's fingers were deft and warm against the sensitive skin of her nape. The heavy platinum unspooled, the clasp giving way with a soft click. He pulled the necklace away, but his knuckles lingered for a fraction of a second against her bare collarbone. The touch sent a violent, involuntary shiver down her spine. "You did well tonight," Vincent noted, dropping the priceless heirloom into a small leather lockbox on the seat beside him. "The press bought it. Carmine bought it. The narrative is set." "I didn't do anything," Harper muttered, staring at her reflection in the dark glass. "I just stood there and let you threaten a man with mutilation. I didn't threaten him." Vincent poured 2 fingers of amber liquid into a crystal tumbler from the car's small bar. He didn't offer her one. "I made a promise. In my world, there is a distinct difference." 4 weeks passed. The gilded cage of the Romano estate slowly became familiar, though it never quite felt like home. Harper learned the rhythms of the house. She learned that the perimeter guards changed shifts at 6 in the morning and 6 in the evening. She learned that Beatrice, the stern housekeeper, had a weakness for daytime soap operas. And she learned that her husband barely slept. Vincent was a phantom in his own home. He left before dawn, returning long after Harper had retreated to her suite in the East Wing. Their interactions were strictly orchestrated. A photographed lunch at a highly visible downtown restaurant. A charity auction where he kept his hand possessively on her thigh under the table. To the world, they were a united, fiercely private couple. Behind closed doors, they were strangers sharing an address, but Lily was thriving. The dark circles under the 8-year-old's eyes had vanished. She spent her afternoons in the solarium with a private tutor, a gentle woman who taught her math and let her paint aggressively messy landscapes on heavy canvas. Lily had stopped hoarding food in her pockets, a habit she had developed when Harper's tips at the diner were short. The transaction was working. Harper had her sister. Vincent had his alibi. It should have been enough. It was 2 a.m. on a Tuesday when the illusion of their neat, separated lives cracked. Harper woke to the sound of screaming. It was a raw, terrified sound that tore through the heavy silence of the house. She hit the hardwood floor before she was fully awake, her bare feet slapping against the cold marble of the hallway as she sprinted toward Lily's room. The nightmares had subsided since they moved in, but when they hit, they were violent. Harper burst through the heavy oak door, her heart lodged in her throat. She stopped dead. Vincent was already there. He was sitting on the edge of Lily's massive canopy bed, still wearing his suit trousers and a crisp white undershirt, his shoulder holster discarded on a velvet armchair nearby. He wasn't awkward. He wasn't trying to hug the thrashing, sobbing child. He was holding a heavy silver pocket watch, letting it swing like a pendulum under the soft glow of a bedside lamp. "Look at the metal, kid," Vincent commanded. His voice wasn't gentle, but it was steady, grounding, an anchor dropped in a stormy sea. "Watch it move, left, right, count the ticks." Lily was hyperventilating, her small hands clutching the expensive duvet like a lifeline, but her tear-filled eyes locked onto the swinging silver disc. "1," Vincent said, his deep voice cutting through the panic. "Say it!" "Oh, 1," Lily gasped. 2, the room is quiet. The doors are locked. 3, Harper stood frozen in the doorway, her hand pressed hard against her mouth. She watched the most dangerous man in the city patiently, methodically dismantle a child's panic attack. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He gave her a task, a rhythm to pull her back to reality. Within 5 minutes, Lily's breathing slowed. The frantic terror bled out of her small body, leaving her exhausted. She slumped back against the pillows, her eyes heavy. Vincent clicked the watch shut. The metallic snap sounded loud in the quiet room. He pulled the heavy blankets up to her chin, his large hand resting briefly on the top of her head. "Sleep," he ordered softly. He stood up, turning toward the door. He stopped when he saw Harper standing in the shadows. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The cold, impenetrable mask he wore for the world was fractured, revealing a bone-deep weariness beneath. "Mateo does that when his combat PTSD acts up," Vincent said quietly, walking past her into the hallway. "It works." Harper followed him out, pulling the door shut until it clicked. She looked at his broad back, the faint scar visible at the base of his neck. He was a criminal. He was ruthless. And God help her, she was falling in love with him. The tension inside the estate escalated violently as the federal trial approached. The dining room, meant to seat 20, was permanently commandeered by high-priced defense attorneys. The air was thick with the smell of sharp espresso and burnt tobacco. Vincent was distant, his jaw perpetually clenched, his eyes dark and distracted. The prosecution was digging deep. They were subpoenaing offshore accounts, pressuring lower-level associates, and circling the newlywed couple like vultures waiting for a carcass. Harper felt the pressure mounting, a physical weight pressing down on her chest. She needed to breathe. She needed to step outside the heavily fortified stone walls, if only for an hour. "I'm taking Lily to the botanical gardens," Harper announced to Beatrice one Thursday afternoon. The housekeeper frowned, her hands pausing over a silver polishing cloth. "Mr. Romano prefers you remain on the grounds this week, ma'am. The press perimeter is aggressive." "I don't care," Harper said, surprising herself with the cold authority in her own voice. She sounded like him. "Call Mateo. Bring the secondary SUV. We leave in 10 minutes. The botanical gardens were a sprawling public labyrinth of glass greenhouses and dense foliage. It was a Tuesday. The crowds were thin. Mateo walked 3 paces behind them, his eyes constantly scanning the intersecting pathways, his hand resting casually near his jacket lapel. Lily ran ahead, fascinated by the massive blooming orchids in the tropical pavilion. Harper finally let her shoulders drop, inhaling the humid, earthy air. Then a man walked past her. He was entirely unremarkable, average height, wearing a gray windbreaker and a faded baseball cap. He didn't stop. He didn't look at her. But as his shoulder brushed violently against hers, he slipped something into the open front pocket of her tote bag. Harper froze. Her instincts, honed by years of surviving a rough neighborhood, flared. She reached into the canvas bag. Her fingers brushed against a thick, heavy envelope. She pulled it out. It was a photograph. Printed on glossy paper, it showed Lily playing in the solarium. The picture had been taken through the estate's heavy iron gates, utilizing a massive telephoto lens. Across the child's face, someone had drawn a jagged, thick red X in permanent marker. On the back, in neat block letters, was a simple message. He falls or she falls. Tell him to take the plea. The blood roared in Harper's ears. The humid air of the greenhouse suddenly felt like ice. Mateo was at her side in less than a second, his gun already half drawn, his eyes locking onto the retreating back of the man in the gray windbreaker. "Don't," Harper choked out, grabbing Mateo's wrist. Her voice was trembling so hard it sounded fractured. "Get Lily. We go home, now." The ride back was a blur of pure, blinding panic. Harper didn't wait for the SUV to fully stop under the portico. She threw the door open, ignoring Mateo's shout, and sprinted up the stone steps. She bypassed the dining room entirely, ignoring the startled looks of the expensive lawyers. She marched straight down the mahogany corridor and shoved the heavy double doors of Vincent's study open. They slammed against the bookshelves with a sound like a gunshot. Vincent looked up from a stack of legal briefs. His eyes narrowed instantly, registering the wild terror on her face. "Out," he barked at the two men sitting across from his desk. They didn't hesitate. They gathered their files and vanished, closing the doors quietly behind them. Harper marched to the desk and threw the photograph onto the polished wood. Vincent looked down. He didn't gasp. He didn't flinch. But the temperature in the room dropped 30 degrees. The mask of the polished businessman shattered completely, revealing the apex predator beneath. A muscle feathered violently along his jawline. "Who?" Vincent demanded, his voice a lethal, quiet whisper. "Some guy at the gardens," Harper yelled, the fear finally boiling over into fury. "He bumped into me. He slipped it in my bag. Mateo was right there, Vincent, and he still got to me." Vincent stood up. He walked around the desk, his presence dark and overwhelming. "I told you to stay on the grounds." "I am not a prisoner," Harper screamed, pushing him in the chest. It was like pushing a brick wall. He didn't budge. "I agreed to wear your ring. I agreed to smile for the cameras. I didn't agree to have a target painted on my sister's back. You said we would be safe." "You are safe," he fired back, catching her wrists in a brutal, uncompromising grip. He dragged her forward until they were inches apart. "Do you understand me? Carmine is a dead man breathing. I will mount his head on the gates by midnight." "It's not just him!" Harper thrashed against his grip, tears of sheer frustration spilling over her eyelashes. "It's all of it. The trial, the press, the guns. Why did you pick me? You could have bought a model. You could have hired an actress. Why drag us into this nightmare?" Vincent stared down at her, his chest heaving, his gray eyes burning with a sudden, violent intensity. The careful distance he had maintained for a month was evaporating. "Because an actress would have crumbled," Vincent snarled, his grip on her wrists shifting, his hands sliding up to grip her face. His thumbs dug into her cheekbones. "A model would have run. I watched you sitting on the floor of a filthy diner, entirely broken, entirely alone. And you were still fighting. You were still trying to save that kid." Harper's breath hitched. She stared up at him, trapped by the heat of his hands and the absolute raw truth in his eyes. "I didn't pick a prop, Harper," he said, his voice dropping to a rough, desperate gravel. "I picked an equal, and I am not going to let anything in this world touch you." He didn't wait for her to respond. He crushed his mouth against hers. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was an explosion of suppressed tension, fear, and absolute possessiveness. Harper didn't pull away. She grabbed the lapels of his shirt, pulling him harder against her, answering the violence with her own desperate, breaking heart. The transaction was dead. This was entirely real. He broke the kiss violently, pulling back just enough to look at her. His breathing was ragged, his chest heaving against hers. He didn't apologize. He didn't soften. He stared down at her bruised, swollen lips, his gray eyes pitch black in the dim lighting of the study. He touched her cheek one last time, his thumb dragging across her cheekbone. Then he turned. "Matteo!" Vincent's roar echoed through the heavy oak doors. The estate transformed into a military compound within 3 minutes. Thick steel shutters, previously hidden in the ceiling architecture, slammed down over the massive windows. The soft ambient lighting shifted to harsh, utilitarian security fluorescence. Armed men in tactical gear materialized from the shadows of the grounds, establishing a hard perimeter. Harper sat in the center of the solarium, wrapped in a thick wool blanket she didn't remember putting on. Lily was asleep upstairs, blissfully unaware of the violence unfolding in the city below, guarded by 3 men who looked like they chewed glass for breakfast. The night dragged. The antique grandfather clock in the hallway ticked with a maddening slow rhythm. Midnight, 2 in the morning, 4. Harper didn't pace. She didn't cry. The panic had burned out, leaving behind a cold, absolute clarity. She had married a criminal to save her sister. She had expected a year of cold indifference. Instead, she had found a man who understood the exact shape of her desperation because it mirrored his own. Vincent Romano was a monster to the world, but to her and to Lily, he was the only shield that had ever held up against the dark. At 5:15, the heavy front doors groaned open. Harper stood up, the blanket slipping from her shoulders to pool on the floor. Vincent walked into the foyer. He looked like he had been through a meat grinder. His expensive suit jacket was gone. His white shirt was torn at the shoulder, heavily stained with soot and dark, blooming patches of blood. His knuckles were split open, the flesh raw and angry. A deep, jagged cut rested over his left eyebrow, the blood drying in a stark line down his jaw. Matteo flanked him, looking equally battered but entirely alert. Vincent stopped when he saw her standing at the edge of the marble floor. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The terrifying, heavy stillness that clung to him answered every question she had. Carmine was gone. The threat to her sister was extinguished, buried under concrete or ash. Harper didn't ask what he had done. She didn't want to know the mechanics of the violence. She crossed the foyer, her bare feet silent on the cold stone, and stopped in front of him. He looked down at her, his expression guarded, waiting for the revulsion. He was covered in another man's blood. He fully expected her to flinch. Instead, Harper reached out. She gently took his ruined, bleeding hand in hers. She didn't tremble. She pressed a soft kiss to his bruised knuckles, tasting salt and copper. Vincent closed his eyes. A long, shuddering breath escaped his chest. He dropped his forehead to her shoulder, wrapping his good arm around her waist, burying his face in her hair. He held on to her like a drowning man clutching a piece of driftwood. 3 weeks later, the federal trial ended not with a bang, but with a whimper. Without Carmine feeding the prosecution fabricated evidence, their star witnesses suddenly developed severe, incurable amnesia. The jury looked at Vincent, a man who spent his weekends at pediatric charity galas with a beautiful, devoted wife and an adopted sister-in-law, and saw a pillar of the community being harassed by an overzealous district attorney. Acquitted on all charges. The afternoon the verdict came down, the estate was quiet. The lawyers had packed their endless boxes of files and vacated the dining room. The heavy security presence had rolled back to its normal, invisible state. Harper was in the study, organizing a stack of Lily's school papers on the mahogany desk, when Vincent walked in. He was back in a tailored suit, looking entirely put together, the cut on his brow healed into a faint, pale scar. He walked to the desk and set down a thick manila envelope. Harper looked at it. "What is that?" "The annulment papers," Vincent said. His voice was completely flat. "The trial is over. I'm legally clear. The year requirement was a buffer, but my lawyers have already drafted the separation agreement. Your severance is in there. It's enough to buy a house in the Heights, fund Lily's college, and keep you both comfortable for the rest of your lives. You're free to go." Harper stared at the envelope. It was exactly what they had agreed upon in that dirty, grease-stained diner. A transaction, a clean break. She looked up at him. His jaw was clenched so tight the muscle twitched. His hands were shoved deep into his pockets. He was giving her an out, forcing himself to let her walk away from the darkness of his world. Harper picked up the heavy envelope. She walked around the desk, stopping directly in front of him. "I told you once that I needed a husband by tomorrow," Harper said, her voice steady, locking her eyes onto his. "I didn't say I only needed him for a year." She tore the thick envelope in half. The heavy legal parchment ripped with a loud, satisfying sound. She tore it again, dropping the shredded pieces of her exit strategy onto the polished floor. Vincent stared at the ruined papers at his feet. When he looked back up at her, the cold, impenetrable wall he hid behind was entirely gone. "Are you sure?" he whispered, his voice rough. "You know exactly what I am." "I know exactly who you are," Harper corrected softly. She reached up, sliding her hands around the back of his neck, pulling him down to her level. "You're my husband. Now shut up and kiss me." He didn't hesitate. He pulled her against his chest, claiming her mouth with a fierce, absolute certainty. The contract was dead. The debt was paid. But as his arms wrapped around her, solid and unyielding, Harper knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. What an explosive finale to Harper and Vincent's story. From a desperate plea in a greasy diner to a fiercely real bond forged in the fires of the criminal underworld, they proved that sometimes the most dangerous deals lead exactly to where you belong. If this intense mafia romance kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you never miss our next gripping story. What was your favorite moment? Let us know in the comments below. Share this video with your fellow romance readers, and we'll see you in the next one.